Have you ever stopped to think that sometimes the person you admire the most can also be the one who challenges you the most and even betrays you? Cho Sang Woo is not just Aries' brilliant friend, he is a mirror of ambition, guilt, and strategy that will make you question everything about trust. What seems like intelligence and leadership may, in fact, hide cold decisions that no one would dare to make. And here is the paradox: the more admirable he seems, the more frightening his morality becomes. Today, we are going to dive into the mind of one of the most complex characters of Round 6 and discover how pressure and survival shape choices that no one would imagine. If you think you understand Sang Woo, get ready to be surprised. If you are a fan of cinema, psychology, and want to understand the mind behind your favorite character, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any video. But first, comment below which character you want me to analyze here on the channel. Now, let's go to the video. Who is the character Cho Sang Woo? For many, is the perfect friend, the one who seemed to have the world in his hands before the game began. He was not just intelligent, he was the personification of ambition, the kind that inspires and intimidates at the same time. Since high school, he always stood out, accumulating awards, high grades, and the trust of everyone around him. But what really made him fascinating was the contrast between this impeccable image and the internal dilemmas that few dared to imagine. For Ari, Sang Woo was more than a friend. He was a role model, someone who inspired both admiration and insecurity. The relationship between them was always marked by a mixture of trust and silent rivalry. Ari looked at Sang Woo and saw someone who could save or destroy depending on the game of life. This dynamic of mutual dependence and expectation created enormous pressure on both, especially on Sang Woo, who felt the obligation to always get it right. Every decision he made carried the shadow of responsibility, and this awareness shaped his choices. The audience begins to feel that behind the elegant smile there was something deeper, almost disturbing. Sang Woo was a natural strategist, someone capable of planning several moves ahead, anticipating actions and calculating risks with surgical precision. But this incredible ability also carried a price. Guilt. He knew that every victory could mean someone else's loss, and that in a survival game, morality and success often clash. This internal conflict makes his figure complex and human, showing that ambition is not always a luxury, but sometimes a trap. The audience begins to feel empathy, even while noticing the coldness in his actions. He became important to Ari not just as an ally, but as a mirror of possibilities. Sang Woo represented the strength of pure logic, unwavering confidence, and at the same time, the shadow of what Ari could become. This duality creates constant tension between the two, a silent dance of trust and distrust. And it is precisely this tension that makes their relationship so fascinating. Every choice Sang Woo makes deeply affects the protagonist, creating a bond of dependence and almost fatal admiration. Sang Woo's ambition manifested in all aspects of his life, but mainly in the game, where every strategic move carried the mark of his calculative mind. He understood that, to survive, he needed to go beyond friendship, morality, and even empathy. This thought generates intense pressure, as every wrong decision could be costly, not only for him but for everyone around. Here we see the dilemma of a man divided between the instinct for survival and the weight of the guilt he carries. Sang Woo is also marked by a cold elegance, an almost irritating self-control that attracts and repels at the same time. This posture is the result of years of psychological training with himself, but it hides deep vulnerabilities. The confidence he demonstrates is partly a facade, and in moments of extreme tension, this mask can crack. It is interesting to note how this ability to hide weaknesses increases his capacity for strategic manipulation, making him even more unpredictable. Betrayal, in Sang Woo's world, is not just a choice, but an almost inevitable consequence of unbridled ambition. He understands that trusting too much is a risk he cannot afford and that every action brings invisible repercussions. This perception creates constant tension, an invisible thread that links his decisions to the silent guilt that haunts him. For Ari, betrayal becomes an emotional shock, because Sang Woo is someone who should be trustworthy, yet whose strategic intelligence challenges even the deepest friendship, and thus Sang Woo presents himself as a character who is at once admirable and frightening. He is the personification of ambition, pressure, and strategy applied to survival, all permeated by a silent guilt that never completely disappears. His importance to the protagonist is enormous, as he shapes decisions, sparks reflection, and provokes internal confrontations. Every step he takes is a reminder that in round 6, neither trust nor friendship is guaranteed, and the line between saving and betraying can be thin. Cho Sang Woo is more than a friend to Ji-hoon. He is a silent guide, someone Ji-hoon admires and fears at the same time. Sang Woo represents elevated intelligence and ambition, showing what is possible when the mind is as strategic as it is relentless. For Ji-hoon, observing Sang Woo is a constant lesson in how to survive and make difficult decisions. The audience perceives that his presence influences every step of the protagonist, creating tension and reflection. The trust that Ji-hoon places in Sang Woo is deep but loaded with uncertainty. Every strategic action by Sang Woo puts Ji-hoon in front of moral dilemmas and critical decisions, forcing him to question how far he can trust. This dynamic generates growth, but also anxiety. It is fascinating to notice how Sang Woo shapes Ji-hoon not only in the game, but in his view of himself and the cruel world around him. Sang Woo serves as a survival mirror for Ji. He demonstrates that, in round 6, intelligence and strategy can be as powerful as strength or luck. Ji-hoon observes every move, learns to calculate risks, and realizes the importance of thinking ahead. This influence allows the protagonist to evolve quickly, facing not only physical challenges but ethical dilemmas that transform him internally. Sang Woo's ambition is a double-edged sword for Ji. It inspires respect and desire for growth, but also generates emotional conflict, as Ji-hoon realizes that not all means are fair or ethical. This ambivalence forces the protagonist to develop his own moral compass, learning to balance survival and principles. For the viewer, this relationship is a lesson in human complexity. Sang Woo's implicit betrayal and constant pressure create decisive tension for Gi. He needs to assess each situation carefully, learning that trusting without thinking can be fatal. This experience shapes his perception of loyalty and strategy, transforming his approach to the game. Every choice of Sang Woo is thus a silent lesson about limits, risks, and consequences. Sang Woo also influences Ji-hoon emotionally, showing that survival often requires painful decisions. He is an example of how ambition and guilt coexist, and how managing these forces is essential to avoid succumbing to pressure. Ji-hoon learns to handle conflicting emotions, make quick decisions, and evaluate risks without letting fear dominate. Sang Woo's presence challenges Ji-hoon to surpass himself, but also forces him to confront the brutal reality of round 6. Every interaction, every strategic choice functions as a character test for the protagonist. Ji-hoon needs to interpret actions, intentions, and consequences, and this constant tension shapes his emotional and strategic evolution, preparing him for even greater challenges. Finally, the importance of Sang Woo for Ji-hoon lies in the silent and profound influence he exerts. He teaches survival through strategy, ambition with caution, trust with scrutiny, and guilt with reflection. The audience realizes that without Sang Woo, Ji-hoon probably would not have developed the cunning, resilience, and moral understanding he carries until the end of the game. He is the shadow that illuminates the protagonist's path. The first trauma of Sang Woo is the weight of family expectations, which always pressured him to be perfect. From an early age, he learned that any failure would be unacceptable, creating a sense of guilt that silently follows him. This trauma shaped his ambition, transforming success into an almost vital necessity. The audience can feel how this constant pressure influences every decision, even the simplest, making survival something personal and emotionally charged. Another deep trauma is the feeling of inadequacy, even though he is recognized by everyone as brilliant. Sang Woo carries the internal doubt that he will never be good enough, which fuels his obsession with flawless strategies. Every step he takes is calculated to prove his worth, and this need for validation shapes his behavior inside and outside the game. Here we see how ambition and guilt combine, generating constant psychological tension. Betrayal is another trauma that haunts him. He learned that blindly trusting could mean his ruin, and this creates an emotional barrier. Even with Ari, trust is never absolute. Every alliance is measured and tested. This trauma generates cold decisions, where survival and strategy speak louder than friendship or morality. The audience feels this tension in every scene, understanding the complexity of his choices. Sang Woo also faces the trauma of extreme responsibility. He feels that any failure could harm not only himself, but all who depend on him. This awareness intensifies internal pressure, making it impossible to emotionally detach from strategic decisions. It is fascinating to observe how this responsibility shapes his personality, creating someone brilliant but constantly in conflict with himself. The guilt for past actions is another invisible burden. Every sacrifice he makes, every betrayal or difficult decision leaves deep marks on his psyche. This trauma makes him meticulous and strategic, but also vulnerable in intimate moments. For the audience, it is interesting to realize that behind the apparent coldness exists a man constantly dealing with his own flaws and regrets. The fear of social rejection is another silent but powerful trauma. Sang Woo fears that any mistake could tarnish his image or lose the trust of those around him. This anxiety shapes his interactions and decisions, making him someone calculative and cautious, always anticipating reactions. Here we see how pressure and guilt can guide behaviors almost invisibly but decisively. The trauma of rivalry, especially with Ari, is also significant. Sang Woo constantly needs to balance friendship, respect, and competition, creating deep emotional tension. Every game is a test, not only of intelligence, but of self-control and ethics. This rivalry, mixed with trust and betrayal, makes his choices unpredictable, keeping the audience in suspense at every move. Finally, the perception of mortality and the urgency of survival is a trauma that influences all his actions. He understands that every strategic decision can be the difference between living or dying, and this amplifies all the other accumulated traumas. Pressure, ambition, and guilt intertwined in this context, creating a complex, fascinating, and disturbing character. The audience is drawn not only to his intelligence, but to the constant tension he carries. Thus, Sang Woo's traumas and internal conflicts intertwine, creating a multifaceted, complex, and fascinating character. Every strategic decision, every act of betrayal or protection is shaped by pressure, guilt, and ambition. The audience feels the tension, empathy, and unease, realizing that the line between villain and hero can be thin. Every step he takes leaves a question in the air. How far can intelligence and strategy take someone before consciousness collapses? Every decision of Sang Woo is a dance between calculation and emotion, where ambition dictates the rhythm and guilt sets the pace. He learned that he cannot allow himself weakness, as every hesitation can be costly. This awareness shapes his personality, cold, strategic, and meticulous, but never completely insensitive. For the audience, it is intriguing to notice how this combination of intelligence and pressure creates someone who seems invincible, yet is constantly in inner conflict. Strategy has become almost an instinct for him, a second nature guiding every step in the game and in life. He does not act impulsively. He calculates risks, anticipates moves, and adapts quickly to situations. This ability shapes his choices, making him always appear a step ahead. At the same time, internal pressure forces him to maintain this perfection, leaving little room for mistakes or vulnerabilities. Guilt, on the other hand, humanizes Sang Woo silently. Every act of betrayal or sacrifice carries an emotional weight that he cannot ignore. This factor shapes his personality. Paradoxically, he is meticulous, cold, and calculating, but also deeply reflective about the consequences of his actions. Ambition and guilt coexist, creating a fascinating contrast that keeps the audience intrigued at every move. The trust placed by others, especially by Ari, subtly but powerfully influences his decisions. Sang Woo knows that any mistake can shake relationships and alter strategic alliances. This knowledge makes his personality even more complex. He is aware of the impact his choices have on others, and this amplifies the tension between survival and morality. Betraying or protecting becomes a constant strategic decision. Every step he takes is calculated, not only to survive, but to ensure that his actions maintain advantage even when ethics are tested. This need to balance betrayal and loyalty shapes how he interacts with others, always calculating consequences and adjusting plans with near-surgical precision. Pressure is an invisible mold that defines his posture, words, and gestures. He carries the weight of external and internal expectations, and every choice is made under this constant burden. This transforms his personality into something admirable yet uncomfortable, someone capable of brilliant decisions, but emotionally isolated, always alert for the next move. Sang Woo also learns throughout the games to adapt his ambition to the cruel reality of Round 6. The perfect plan does not always work, and he needs to adjust his strategies, balancing survival with guilt and trust. This adaptability shapes his personality, making him resilient and, paradoxically, more human. Even when his actions seem cold or calculating, in the end, every choice of Sang Woo is a direct expression of how ambition, guilt, pressure, and strategy intertwine. His personality results from a delicate balance between survival instinct and moral awareness. For the audience, it is impossible not to feel tension, empathy, and even discomfort while following every step, always wondering how far will he go to win and at what cost. Cho Sang Woo faces decisions that have no easy answers, each choice loaded with risk and consequence. He needs to balance ambition and morality, knowing that every step can mean survival or loss. The audience feels the tension, realizing that his strategic mind never rests. Every act of calculation is also an act of courage, revealing the complexity of a character who struggles between reason and emotion. One of the most impactful decisions is when he must choose between saving himself or protecting allies. The internal pressure is immense, and the potential guilt haunts him. This tension shapes his personality, showing how strategy and survival can come into direct conflict with personal values. For the audience, it is a moment of reflection on how far ambition should go. Sang Woo also has to deal with betrayal, aware that trusting too much can be fatal. Every decision about alliances requires deep analysis, weighing risks and rewards. This balance between trust and distrust creates a fascinating psychological dynamic. The audience realizes that even in a cruel game, there is room for emotional intelligence and strategic calculation. Another critical moment is when guilt over past choices weighs on him. Every sacrifice, every strategy that harms someone leaves invisible marks. This responsibility shapes his future decisions, making them even more calculated. Constant pressure creates silent tension that captivates the audience, revealing the psychological cost of ambition. Sang Woo's ambition often collides with ethics, creating complex moral dilemmas. He must evaluate whether survival justifies questionable actions. This duality makes him an intriguing character, challenging the audience to consider what they would do in his place. Every critical choice reflects the delicate balance between mind and conscience. Sang Woo's strategy is not limited to physical moves, but involves manipulating situations and reading behavior. Every critical decision is a test of intelligence and courage. The audience realizes that he does not merely play. He thinks several steps ahead, anticipating scenarios and calculating consequences almost surgically. Decisions involving Ari are particularly impactful as they mix friendship, trust, and betrayal in equal measure. Every action of Sang Woo is measured to maximize survival without completely abandoning ethics. This complexity creates intense suspense, keeping the audience questioning the limits of morality and loyalty. Finally, all these critical decisions consolidate Sang Woo as a master of strategy and survival, but also as someone deeply human, shaped by ambition, guilt, and pressure. Every step is calculated but carries silent emotion. The audience is left in a continuous state of tension, fascinated by the mind of a character who knows that the line between hero and villain is thin and constantly tested. Cho Sang Woo lives in a constant duality between being admired and feared, between hero and villain. Ambition drives him to act with courage, but guilt keeps him aware of the impact of his choices. This tension creates a fascinating character, challenging simple definitions. For the audience, it is impossible not to wonder, is he truly a villain or just someone forced by circumstances to make difficult choices? Sang Woo's strategy reinforces this duality. Every action is calculated to maximize survival, often at the expense of others. This balance between intelligence and morality shows how thin the line between heroism and villainy can be. The audience feels the tension in every move, realizing that Sang Woo's brilliant mind is both a blessing and a threat. Trust is another factor defining his duality. Sang Woo knows how to inspire loyalty and respect, but also generates distrust and fear. This ambivalence makes his interactions complex and unpredictable. He can save someone one moment and betray in another, keeping the audience in a constant state of suspense about his true intentions. The guilt he carries humanizes his actions, even when they seem cold or calculated. Every act of betrayal or sacrifice is heavy, showing that he does not act out of pure malice, but out of the need to survive. This mix of rationality and emotion makes Sang Woo simultaneously understood and judged, increasing narrative tension. The pressure of the game amplifies his duality. He needs to make quick decisions, balancing survival, strategy, and morality. Every step he takes is a test of character, and every choice shapes his image in front of Ari and the other players. The audience realizes that, in this extreme context, even the most admirable hero can become a villain. Betrayal and loyalty intertwine in his personality, creating constant internal conflicts. Sang Woo understands that, in round 6, full trust is dangerous, but survival depends on intelligent alliances. This awareness shapes his duality, making the audience question how much he is driven by ambition or by ethical principles. Ambition, always present, serves as the driving force behind his choices, but also as a source of moral tension. He acts to ensure his survival and achieve goals, but every decision is weighed under the burden of guilt and pressure. This constant internal battle between instinct and conscience keeps the narrative intense and captivates the audience. In the end, Cho Sang Woo's duality is what makes him unforgettable: hero or villain, admirable or feared, strategic or emotionally vulnerable. He embodies human complexity in extreme situations, showing that intelligence, ambition, and guilt can coexist in a fascinating way. The audience is left reflecting on morality, survival, and the choices that define who we really are. What the character teaches us, the constant pressure that Sang Woo faces, is reflected in every critical moment of the narrative. He shows us that survival is not just physical strength, but the ability to think, calculate, and anticipate scenarios. This strategic approach redefines how we perceive heroes and villains in extreme situations, making the character a study in human behavior. Betrayal and loyalty, recurring themes in his trajectory, leave lessons about trust, ethics, and survival. Every act of Sang Woo provokes reflection on personal and collective limits and on how far someone would go to survive. The audience is invited to experience intense moral dilemmas, making the narrative more engaging and immersive. His ambition, always present, drives not only his actions, but also the narrative tension. Sang Woo teaches us that intelligence and strategy are powerful tools, but they carry the burden of guilt and responsibility. This duality keeps the audience attentive, glued to the narrative and the character's complex choices. The impact of Cho Sang Woo goes beyond the game. He influences the audience's perception of morality and ethics in extreme contexts. He challenges the idea of right and wrong, showing that in situations of intense pressure, difficult decisions shape character and destiny. Observing him is an invitation to reflect on ambition, survival, and moral awareness. In the end, Sang Woo remains one of the most complex and memorable characters of Round 6. His trajectory combines strategy, guilt, pressure, and ambition, creating a legacy that transcends the screen. The audience connects with his choices, reflects on morality, and survives mentally the dilemmas he faced. His story reminds us that survival is not only physical, but deeply psychological. So, what did you think of Cho Sang Woo's mind? Can you identify with any of his dilemmas, or were you surprised by the strategic decisions he made? I want to know in the comments which character you want me to analyze in the next video. Remember, if you want to continue learning about complex choices, pressure, and survival, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell because there is a lot of deep analysis coming. Every character we explore here has lessons that go far beyond the screen, and you will not want to miss any of them.